Welcome back into Sportsmemo's betting podcast. We got college football, every game on the board with Robbie Veno, our next guest. Robbie, how you doing today?
I am doing great, Drew. How about yourself?
I'm doing good, man. Interested to get your opinion here on this next batch of games. We got 3-6-1, 3-6-2 up first in the Big Ten. Northwestern at Nebraska. Looks like the Cornhuskers laying 7 at home, 48.5 the total.
Yeah, it really does shape up as a do-or-die game, at least on the Northwestern side. Nebraska does have a divisional win over Illinois already inside the Big Ten West. Of course, they get destroyed by Ohio State out of the East, but for West Division purposes, Nebraska's unblemished right now. Northwestern has just got to come up with something. Slow start again, Drew. It's nothing new for them the last 3 years. If you go back, Pat Fitzgerald's team gets off to a slow start. He brings them on. They wind up making a bowl game. Here, they've already lost to Wisconsin inside the division. So like I say, this becomes very, very important to them. Offensively, they've been a bust all season long. Hunter Johnson, 5-star recruit from Clemson, who transferred over to Northwestern, just hasn't been able to get things going in the passing game, especially. The offensive line hasn't helped much. Northwestern sacked 5 times last week by Wisconsin. Still, I'm interested in taking the points here, Drew, if I had to take a side, because Northwestern's defense has been outstanding the last 2 weeks. Nobody had stopped Wisconsin until Northwestern did last week, held them to 243 yards. Jonathan Taylor did not have highlights all over the television after that game. So I think Northwestern defensively probably good enough. They've played Nebraska tight the last couple of years, and who could really be thrilled with laying 7 points with Nebraska at this point in time? When you look at Northwestern's schedule, they're 1-3, but you know, when I went through it, Drew, I'm thinking to myself, which one of those 3 losses did you really expect them to win? They had a chance at Stanford. The 17-7 is a little bit deceptive because Stanford took a fumble in at the end of the game to make that score 17-7. But you didn't expect them to beat Michigan State, and you really didn't expect them to beat Wisconsin. So I think this is a good start for them, following in the tradition or the trend that Pat Fitzgerald has started the last 2-3 years. I think Northwestern probably begins to pick things up here, and Northwestern's defense certainly an opportunity here for Northwestern to make some hay on the ground against them and maybe at least get a decent passing game going. So I think 7 would be worth a look here.
Robbie, let's head down to the SEC. We got Georgia at Tennessee here in the SEC East. Bulldogs laying 24 or 24.5 in Neyland Stadium, 51.5 the total.
Hard to recommend Tennessee, even at the price, Drew, although their defense has not been bad. I mean, overall, the initial impression of Tennessee this year, anybody you ask would, give it a thumbs down. But if you go through their defensive numbers, they're not horrible on that side of the football. Justin Garantano hasn't gotten anything going with the offense. There's a little disruption on that team personnel-wise right now, too, which isn't good in the middle of the season. Of course, Philip Fulmer had to come out and stand up for his head coach, Jeremy Pruitt. But the players are not all that happy. There are some players that aren't all that happy there right now. It's just not a good scenario to be taking on Georgia, who's off of a bye week after the Notre Dame game. Tennessee off of a bye week as well, but I don't know. Or excuse me, Georgia's the only team off of the bye week here. I just don't think that's a good situation for Tennessee. Georgia was unable to line up and hand it off to DeAndre Swift and company and run it down Notre Dame's throat the way a lot of college football analysts thought they would be able to. In this case, it should be a little bit easier for them. And defensively, they've just been tremendous all season long. Like I say, it's hard to recommend Tennessee. It's an East Division game, and it's a rivalry of sorts. You'd like to be able to at least consider 24.5 points, but I can't at this point in time. Might be able to look at the over 51.5 as well here, thinking that Georgia should be able to find their way to 40-plus in that game.
Robbie, let's head to the military academies here. And we got Air Force at Navy. Air Force minus 3.5 on the road, 45 the total.
Yeah, the big question all week long surrounded Malcolm Perry and his health, the quarterback for Navy, and it looks like he's going to play, now listed as probable as we talk here on Thursday afternoon, Drew. So you get a real good battle, right? Donald Hammond, the third for Air Force. Malcolm Perry on the other side. The academies have not had quarterbacks this good both ways as far as rushing and throwing the football. I mean, it's what's made these two teams explosive this year. Hammond, both of these option teams, and Army included, every year it's the same deal. When they go to throw the ball, there's always somebody running wide open. The question always becomes, do you have a quarterback good enough to complete the downfield throw and score an easy 7? And both of these teams have that this year, and both of these guys. So I would expect a really good game here. I think Air Force at this point in time is a hair bit better. I think their ground game is a little bit better. But Navy certainly has turned it around from last season. I'm a little surprised, Drew. There's no weather situation here in Annapolis, Maryland on Saturday. At why the total is 45. I think that this game has every possibility, because I'm considering the quick strike, which they've both shown us throughout the first few weeks of the season. I think it's got every possibility to make it into the vicinity of 27-20. 45 to me just seems really low. I know they've both played sound defense so far this year, but I just like the explosiveness of both of these quarterbacks and their ability to make plays through the air. Each one of these two teams is throwing it a shade more than they have in the past because these guys are capable of completing passes. So I would look for Air Force, Navy, maybe to squeak over that 45 number.
Good stuff, Robbie. We'll head to the MAC now. Western Michigan at Toledo. Looks like the Rockets laying 1.5 in the Glass Bowl, 72.5 the total, Robbie.
Yeah, you probably couldn't get a better hand and glove fit as far as the matchups on the field are concerned, Drew, because Western Michigan with John Wassing can throw the football all over the lot, and Toledo can't stop teams from throwing the football all over the lot. On the other side of that equation, of course, is the fact that Toledo has been terrific running the football with Mitchell Guadani, the quarterback, acting as an additional runner in that offense. And Western Michigan hasn't stopped anybody from running the football so far this year. So both teams, what they do best offensively, they should be able to do against the opposing defense. And then when you factor in, the other half of their offense, because both of these teams are balanced, they're very, very capable of running and throwing. Neither team really stops the alternate option either. So there's a reason why this total went from 68 all the way to 73. It's a big number. It's probably too big for me because at 38-35, you still can't win a bet on this game. I think those who got in at 68, even 69, 70, I think those three numbers were good in this game. Once you hit 71, you're talking about 37-34, 41-30, stuff like that. Gets a little bit more tentative. But I do think it's going to be a high-scoring game. Toledo at home gets a little bit of an edge, but in my heart of hearts, I think Western Michigan's the better football team this year, having seen them both. So I might lean towards Western Michigan plus the points, but you're going to get a shootout and a very competitive shootout no matter what.
Robbie, in the Big 12, next game up 369-370, the Oklahoma Sooners visiting Lawrence, Kansas, taking on the Kansas Jayhawks. We're seeing 67.5 with the Sooners laying north of 30 points here, 32 at Kansas. Yeah,
you saw KU just destroyed last week, brought them down to earth a little bit after having a big couple of weeks, coming close against West Virginia, and, of course, having a big win before that. But they got put in their place last week. Kansas, Les Miles, he's still got the bottom of the barrel team in the Big 12, and it's going to take some recruiting classes. It's going to take some time before they become more competitive. Oklahoma should be able to name their score in this one. The trouble I have with it is the fact that there's weather concerns in this game, and it may be why we see a little bit of money on Kansas off of the opener here in this game, Drew. If you take a look at the weather report projected for this game, you'll find that it's an 11 a.m. start in Lawrence, Kansas, and there's going to be thunderstorm activity anywhere between 65% when the game starts to 35% when the game ends. The 3.5-hour, 4-hour block shows all thunderstorms. It's not the be-all, end-all when these thunderstorms affect games, because generally speaking, what happens is they see the thunder, they see the lightning, they take the teams off the field and don't bring them back until things are clear. The weather is supposed to clear later in the day. So, like I say, it's not the be-all, end-all to have thunderstorms, but I think that might be a little bit of the reason why there's some Kansas money here. If they play in rain and don't stop the game because there is no lightning involved, then you might find, Oklahoma 45-10 or something like that, cutting it a little close with that opener of 34. But again, like I said with Tennessee earlier, it's about impossible to make a case for Kansas. Anything aside from Oklahoma turnovers would any other thing would lead you to an Oklahoma rout. And the fact that the Oklahoma defense has played so much better this year, Drew, I think it's been talked about a little bit, beginning to get talked about a little bit more. But Oklahoma, for what it's worth, so far through 4 games, is only allowing 345 yards per contest. Better than that, they're only allowing less than 20% third down conversions. So they're getting teams off of the field and they're getting the ball back, which allows them to extend margin real quickly. And when you get put into a hole by Oklahoma, there's just no climbing out of it, especially if you're somebody like Kansas. You better be Alabama, or you better be Clemson or Georgia, or somebody who's got the ability to score quickly. Otherwise, you're not coming back against these guys. And we saw last week against Texas Tech, that snowball just kept rolling all the way to 55-16. You could probably see something in that vicinity once again this week.
Let's get some more action here, Robbie. Ohio at Buffalo, seeing the Bobcats laying 3.5 on the highway, 51 the total.
Yeah, I'm in with Ohio here, Drew. Buffalo has been so Jekyll and Hyde all season long. I watched the Penn State game. I bought into Buffalo because statistically the game was much, much closer than the 45-13 final would indicate. Buffalo was in that game midway through the third and looked like they were going to be a pretty easy cover at plus 31.5, and somehow they wind up blowing that game. At least it closed at 31.5. Wind up losing by 32. But I bought in a little bit. Next week they go to Liberty. They get absolutely smacked 35-17 by a team that had done nothing the first 2 weeks of the year. They come back. They destroy Temple. And Temple had just come off of a win against Maryland, which looked pretty good at the time. Then last week, Buffalo, takes a lead against Miami and winds up getting whacked by 2 touchdowns. So this team is just a seesaw, back and forth, back and forth. If you were going to use that theory, that good 1 week, bad the next, good 1 week, bad the next, then you would anticipate Buffalo to be good this week. However, I think Frank Solich, off of a bye week, with his Ohio U team sitting at 1-3 right now, I think it's a pretty good block of 4 games that they have coming up before their next bye week, where they can make some hay. Buffalo, Northern Illinois, Kent State, Ball State. They've played some decent teams to date. UL Lafayette, they lose that game, but Lafayette's a really good team. They lose by 10 to Pitt. They lose by 2 to Marshall. It's probably time for this team, which had high expectations to start the year, with Nathan O'Rourke at quarterback, to start winning games. They're just a better team than Buffalo in my estimation. I don't know that the road makes a difference. Somewhat concerned about the way Buffalo turns it on and turns it off, but I don't think they're good enough to beat Ohio here this week.
Yeah, Robbie, Buffalo's all over the place, man. They'll win a game you don't expect them to, and then they don't show up. I can't figure that team out. But let's head to the Big 12. TCU at Iowa State. Cyclones laying 3 or 3.5 at home. 43 low total here in the Big 12, Robbie.
Yeah, and that's because of weather as well. Ames, Iowa, earlier in the week, it really looked like it was going to rain throughout the entire day. That weather report has changed a little bit. And remember, at Ames, Iowa, it's rained every time they've been at home. They played Iowa there. It rained. That game was delayed. They played UL Monroe there, a game which I remember well because it was a $2 Tuesday play for me over the total. Projected rain, heavy rain all week long. Got to the game. It didn't rain in the first half, but it did rain second half. Game got well over. ISU scored 76. Here we're looking at rain again, but that forecast has been somewhat shifted to only half of the game. First half we'll see rain, maybe none in the second half. I just want to run a couple of quick numbers by you here, Drew, that I found interesting about Iowa State. So far this season, 50% of their offensive drives have crossed midfield. So they've gotten into the other team's territory 50% of the time. I know that ULM game skews it a little bit because they scored 76, but if you look at the Iowa game, which is an extremely good defense, they had 7 drives against Iowa that began between their own 14 and their own 25. That's 75 to 86 yards away from their end zone. Of those 7 drives, 6 of those got across midfield in that game. They had 9 drives of 29-plus yards, 4 of 45-plus yards, so they can move the football. This team feels, in reading an article this week, that they're on the brink of a big breakout offensively. All season long, the Iowa State offense has had 2 3-and-outs all year long. So they've possessed the football. They've just made mistakes when they get close. That's why they haven't put up big numbers every week. Might be able to do it here against TCU. TCU's been pretty good behind Max Duggan, the true freshman, 38 points the last 2 weeks that he's started. Off of the SMU loss, they came back with a pretty big win. I think, Iowa State offensively, if this weather forecast gets a little better, it might be good enough now to go ahead and play over this low 40s total. I have to tell you, TCU's shown me enough offensively, and I think Iowa State, the coaching staff, I'm going to defer to them and believe that this team's on the verge of a breakout going off of those numbers. So maybe we're going to get to the over here, Drew, because I think there's been a huge overreaction pushing this total down so far the 4 days that it's been up.
Robbie, let's head to the SEC. We got a cross-division battle here with the Vanderbilt Commodores visiting Oxford, Mississippi. It looks like Ole Miss laying 7 at home, 63.5. The total in Vaught Hemingway Stadium.
Yeah, here's another one, Drew, and I hate to continue talking about weather, but it seems like you and I have the block where all the weather games are concerned this week, because the rest of the schedule, really, there's not any weather concerns. But this one in Oxford, if it was any other start time, it wouldn't be bad. But this particular start time of 6:30 Central, rain all game long. 45 to 70% chance of rain. I would love to be on over here. Certainly not buying into Vanderbilt's defensive effort last week against Northern Illinois, a team that has no offense to speak of. I know Derek Mason right away wanted to tout that the defense made some strides in last week's game. Not going to make any strides here against Mississippi, which has shown to be pretty good offensively so far this year. 2 brand new coordinators. I love a clip I saw on Twitter of Rich Rod up in the box with 3 other Mississippi offensive coaches going absolutely ballistic, right? Throws the headset off. Typical Rich Rodriguez. But they seem to be understanding the offense. Matt Corral, freshman quarterback, might not be available here, but he wasn't available last week either. To me, Mississippi can score, and Vandy's got the weapons to score as well. That's a pretty good team. Keyshawn Vaughn, Riley Neal, the transfer from Ball State. They've done good things offensively as well. So hopefully we can avoid this weather and get to the total. It's been played up real high, 58 all the way to 63.5. So right now, money's unafraid of what might be 4 hours worth of rain.
Robbie, next game up, we got Marshall at Middle Tennessee. MTSU catching 4 at home, 54 the total.
Yeah, I don't want any part of them, Drew. That team's got a lot of rebuilding to do. We knew it coming in, and their defense has been absolutely crushed week by week. Granted, Michigan and Iowa are far more physical Big Ten teams than what Middle Tennessee is, so to see them get crushed isn't exactly eye-opening, but what is a little bit eye-opening is seeing Iowa total 644 yards against anybody in that 48-3 rout last week. So I think Middle Tennessee's got a lot of work to do on the defensive side of the football. To me, Marshall has a huge edge in that department in this game. They got steamrolled by Cincinnati last week. They just didn't come out ready for what Cincinnati had physically, and run or pass, Desmond Ridder and company were all over Marshall from the outset. But I think back to when they went to Boise State and held Boise to 14 points. So Marshall, I think their game last week defensively, much more of a mirage than reality. But I think what we saw out of Middle Tennessee is really the truth about their defense here. They don't have enough offense to overcome that this season. I think Marshall gets back at it here in a conference game, in a divisional game, walks in and gets the win against MTSU.
We got one game left in this segment, and Robbie, we're going to finish off with Notre Dame. But first, Do you want to remind everybody your 5% CFBs 13-5? That's 72% going back to last year on his top rated plays. So check out his page for college football 5%ers. That's our top rating. Also the 5%ers across all sports since 2007. Yes, that's more than a decade. He's 136 and 86 for 61%. So check out Robbie Veno. His top plays have been great. You can get his full service as well. So check it out at sportsmemo.com. We'll also have him on tomorrow's podcast on the NFL. Every game on the board. Let's finish it off here with Bowling Green at Notre Dame. The Irish laying 46. No, that's not the total. That's the spread. The total is 61.5. Robbie, you interested in getting involved here?
You know, I did a couple of weeks back when they played New Mexico. It kind of reminds me of the same type game. Notre Dame won that 166-14, went over the total all by themselves, right? Yeah. But Bowling Green's inept. There's no other way to describe them right now offensively except inept. Gave up 62 points to Kent last week. Now, you know, you could play the total over. Certainly, I wouldn't argue with anybody who does, under the assumption that Notre Dame's going to get you to 55 points, and all you need is 7 out of Bowling Green, which Notre Dame, you know, could be a given at the end of a contest or even somewhere in the middle. So I'm not against it, but the game just has no shot of being competitive from start to finish here. Notre Dame last week, against a lot of opinion in the market, which sided with Virginia, they absolutely destroyed Virginia's second half. And Notre Dame's defensive line drew real quick last week, 8 sacks out of the defensive line, plus a fumble recovery for touchdown. I don't know how Bowling Green's going to keep them out of the backfield. Ian Book and company may rattle off 42 points in the first half and maybe take it easy in the second half. I think if you wanted to play over, like I said, I can't argue. I would not, just not in the habit of laying 46.5, even though you could forecast this as being a definite route.
Robbie, great stuff as always. And guys, we'll have Robbie on tomorrow for the NFL Every Game on the Board podcast. Check out his packages at sportsmemo.com. And after a short break, we'll be right back with Teddy Covers.